Hello everybody and welcome to today's IEP LiveLearnLunch. We are joined today by one of our fellows, Emma from Cognisoft, who is going to be taking us through her tips and sharing her expertise on how we can approach when we purchase software. So I'm going to pass you straight over to Emma, and I will encourage you throughout the session to use the chat facility to ask any questions and share any content comments that you may have, and I will make sure I share those with Emma throughout. So over to you, Emma.
Thanks, Helen. Hi, everybody. I'm Emma Cook. I'm the Managing Director of Cognisoft. If I'll just start sharing my screen. And just start the slideshow. I haven't done this as a PowerPoint heavy presentation because I think death by PowerPoint is one of the worst things to do. So it's really me talking around hints and tips on procuring. We're experts in case management systems and management information systems. That's where our expertise lies. But actually, it's any type of software that you're buying. It's looking at the things that you need to be prepared for and the sort of hints and tips, the pitfalls maybe to watch out for. So hopefully, as you go into any sorts of procurements that you're doing, you've just got a little bit more armour under your belt. Actually, I should introduce myself properly first. So I'm the Managing Director of Cognisoft. We supply primarily a piece of software called Yeti that's used in apprenticeship training, employability, and careers advice and guidance marketplaces. We've been in business since 1984, which makes us quite old. I can't work it out. And I've been here since 1988, which is too many years for me to really want to worry about. I've worked right the way through all sorts of iterations of technology, and really not a lot changes actually as you go through the years and what you need to be looking for. What I go through today probably isn't going to tell you anything new. It's mainly all common sense, but mainly just things that maybe you haven't thought about as you are sort of looking for the types of software that maybe you want to buy. In most instances, when you are looking at software, you have a choice of competitors. And so it's finding which bit of software is going to suit you and your business best. And it sounds quite simple to go out and just buy some software because we're delivering this. And sometimes it's not as simple as you think it is. For me, in the years of experience that I've had working here and delivering and implementing software across hundreds of different organizations that I've done, it comes down to three key things that you need to have in the forefront of your mind when you are looking for software. The building blocks to any successful organization, in my view, is people, process, and technology. If you get all three of those things right, your business will grow and it will prosper, in my view. If there is an issue in one of those three areas, that's where it's going to start causing some problems. I'm going to concentrate obviously on the technology, but technology is underpinned really heavily by your people and your processes. So how do we go about looking for the technology or the systems that we want to buy? So there's a number of decisions that you need to make. The first one actually is critical. Are you going to go and buy something that you're going to have built for yourselves? Or are you going to go and buy something that already exists that does the job that you're looking for? There are advantages and disadvantages of both. Neither one is right or wrong. It comes down to what's right for you and your business and also personal preference. The advantages of bespoke software, obviously it's written to your own specification. It will do what you want it to do. That obviously comes with a disadvantage, which is if you don't document what you want it to do correctly, you're not going to get the product that you think you're buying. Another advantage is obviously the complete ownership. With bespoke software, you will end up owning the intellectual property rights for that software. So most organizations who develop bespoke software, as part of the contract that you enter into, you will own the IPR at the end of it. What that means, it's quite powerful actually, is you could actually take that and change suppliers. For instance, you know, if you get a specific system written in a particular language, you can then go out and look for other developers who can carry on developing that piece of software for you. So you have that total ownership. In cost terms, it can be more costly upfront because you're paying for the development fees for it. So quite often you'll pay a massive lump sum in year one as you're paying for everything to be written. And then the subsequent years become a lot cheaper. You end up with hosting costs if you decide to host it up in the cloud, or internal costs for doing that. But it is generally more costly in year one. The continual development for it is under your control. So you obviously, as your systems and processes change, you can get those reflected by having them built and built again to your specification. And you also, don't forget, need to consider security in all of this. By building the specification, you need to make sure that you've taken into account the security elements of it, and I'll cover a little bit more about security later. When you go off the shelf, I'm just going to move my little Zoom window here a second. When you go off the shelf, you're generally buying from a supplier who has sector knowledge, because the software already exists for either the purpose that you want it for or a similar purpose. So by doing that, you're buying not only their software, but also their sector knowledge and know-how. So you could actually learn from them. There's a more even distribution of cost when you're buying off the shelf. So you have an implementation cost in year one, which is slightly higher. But then after that, you have your annual cost of either buying or owning that system in terms of licenses, but it is more easily spread. You have, and the other thing about cost actually in terms of distribution for it is it's quite often more well known, because you're not paying for ongoing development, which could run off the scale. Quite often, if you're buying an off-the-shelf product, there is a user community for that product, whether it's an online user community in terms of forums, or like we do, user groups, where you get groups of users together. We can tell you what's happening with the software. We can get your feedback. When we can do them face-to-face, you get the opportunity to meet other users of the system and share best practice. And also, off-the-shelf products quite often will have tools that if you were to go out and think of the software yourselves, you might not have thought of, because they've often been in development and been in existence for a long time. Yeti was first released in its first iteration in 1988. It's over 30 years old now. So everything that we have done to that product has grown, and we've added features and benefits, and we might have taken some away because they're no longer relevant, or the technology no longer supports them. We've added in new features, and quite often those features and tools come as part of the product as well, so you don't have to sort of pay extra for them. You get these added bonuses that come with it. So once you've decided which one of those routes you're going to go down, in terms of actually getting the software that you want, the first question really you need to consider is, are you looking for a piece of software that's going to drive your process? Or are you looking for a piece of software that is going to support your process? There's a key difference between these, and it's a very, very subtle word change, but it has a massive impact. If your technology and your software is going to drive your process, what you end up with is a very pre-designed, rigid workflow of information that a user just has to follow. It takes the thinking away from the user, and the software just guides them through everything they need to do. So you have little configuration or flexibility available to you, but it meets the exact needs of your specification. There is, however, downsides to this. I'll give you an example. It's a personal example, and it's not actually software related to a degree, although it is when I sort of come to the conclusion of it. But a long time ago, I won't even tell you how long ago, I had an Alfa Romeo car. I loved it to bits. It was the best car I've ever driven. And it was a cellar speed, which is like a semi-automatic car. And after a year of owning it, every so often when I was driving it, it would slip out of gear, usually when second gear, and go into neutral. And you couldn't get the car back into gear. So I'd have to switch off the engine, let it settle, switch it back on again, and off I go again. This is a bit dangerous because once those cars go out of gear, you can't do anything with them. So you're sat in the middle of the road. So I took it to the garage and I asked them to have a look at it. So the garage hooked it up to the computers, as they do, and they checked it all out. And I got a phone call to tell me to come and get it. And as they handed the keys over, they said, "There's nothing wrong with it. The computer says everything is fine." So I was right, okay, that's great. Went away. The next day, I broke down. Same thing happened. It slipped out of gear. I was at a very busy crossroads junction in the car with my 6-month-old baby in the back of it, and the car broke down and nothing I could do could get that car started. Long story short, the car ended up on a tow truck being towed to the garage. So again, they hooked it up to the computer and I got a call the next day to say, "Mrs. Cook, you can come and collect your car because computer says there's nothing wrong with it." So at this point, I'm thinking there's got to be, because it came in on the back of a tow truck. They can't have. And I asked, what have you done to fix it? Nothing, because there's nothing wrong with it. So I said, "Okay, have you driven the car?" And they just went, "No." So I said, can I suggest to you just go and switch it on and just try and drive it out of the showroom, out of the garage, whatever it is. Off they popped. Half an hour later, "Oh yes, Mrs. Cook, we can't get it into gear. We can't drive it." So the software that they were reliant on had told them there was nothing wrong with the car. And they're so used to using the diagnostic techniques that come with the more complicated engines of the cars these days, that the old ability of a mechanic to look under the bonnet and do all of that diagnostic work had just completely disappeared. Obviously, they then fixed the car. I don't know what was wrong with it in the end, but they did fix it. That's an example where the technology was driving the process. Nobody at that garage, even after 2 visits, thought, should we just give it a go and give it a try? And that is the downside in a very extreme version of it. That's what can happen. Recently, again, a very slightly different example, my brother-in-law got hit by a hit and run car. So he contacted his insurance company, and it was one of those call center style questionnaires that they take you through. And the first question is, "Can you give me the name and details of the other driver?" My brother-in-law said, "No, I can't, because it was a hit and run. He didn't stop." Every question after that required the name and contact details of the other driver. And eventually my brother-in-law said, "We can't carry on at this point, but I've got I reported it to the police. I've got a police incident number," which twigged something in that operator. And he said, "Oh, I've got another series of questions if I've got that." So again, the software had driven them down the particular path, but hadn't allowed that person to think. He knows, as soon as my brother-in-law had said it, he knew that that was another option to him, but the software wasn't telling him. So whoever designed the software hadn't designed it with that in mind. So that's a downside of your technology driving your process. However, using your technology to drive your process cuts down potentially on training, because your users, you can just pop them in front of it and they can just click, 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 and off they go. And it can become more efficient because of it. When your software supports your process, this is a subtle difference. This allows you to build enough into the software so it follows your processes, and it gives you the workflows through, but it allows the user to pop out at various points. So if you have a process that, say, I've got to complete screens 1, 2, and 3, and there's something missing from screen 2 that I can't get past, and there's a reason for that, and it's a valid reason, I can still go to screen 3 and I can come back to screen 2. And a good piece of software will then prompt you on that reverse flow because you've missed a piece of information. So you'll have exception reporting or anything else that goes alongside that. And that is quite important, and especially when, you know, case management information software, anything along those lines, are dealing with people, and people don't always, and I'm not talking about the users here, but actually the customers, the service users to that software, don't always follow that rigid path. So you need something where you can dip out of a process but still record the data. If you don't allow that to happen, what will happen in case management talk is that users will start to record things on pieces of paper. I can't book that next meeting because my software says I have to have done this first. So what I'll do is I'll pop it on a piece of paper, I'll agree it, and I'll pop it on a piece of paper, or I'll make a spreadsheet, and they start to use that more than the system. So now you're missing data from within your system, and they're potentially missing vital reminders that would come up. So an appointment not being put into the system's calendar would then not necessarily appear on a dashboard to prompt them the appointment's there, because they've written it in a diary. Because they've written it down, they've moved on and they've forgotten to go back. So you need to make your system in such a way that it doesn't prevent somebody from working because it's following too many rules. If your technology supports your process, you will have continual configuration and flexibility. In the case of case management software, and especially the programs that this sector delivers, what you're delivering on day one doesn't necessarily reflect perhaps what you're delivering in a year's time or 2 years' time, because things within the external processes change, and additional pressures may come into play. So for instance, in employability programs, you know, nobody would have predicted what's happened over the last 16 months when we were 2 years ago. So you build a program 2 years ago and all of a sudden, you know, everything's exploded in a way, and it will have changed the way that you need to work with your client group, and even the client group that you're working with. So that flexibility is key, and the ability to quickly make changes to your software to perhaps change the processes that you're working with and have that ability to change. So a technology that, or a process, that a software that supports your process will meet the needs of your initial specification, but will be easily adapted to change. So if that's important to you, you need to know that from the off. The downside of this, obviously, is because your users need to understand the software much better, you will need to train them in your processes, very importantly, and the software in perhaps more detail than you would do with a rigid system that just walks them through everything. But by doing that, when they get to one of those decision points, they know where to go to continue to record the data where it needs to be and to continue on. So that's a really important consideration for you. And it might not be an open decision that you go in with, I'm going to go and find something that supports it, I'm going to find something that drives it. But certainly as you're looking at the software that you're looking to buy, those considerations of how rigid or how flexible it is, how easy is it to change at a short notice, is quite important, or could be quite important to you. So where do you start when you're looking at what you want your software to do? And actually, what you do is you start with the end in mind. What is the final output of your system? What does it need to tell you? What does it need to give you? So if you're in a sector where you're producing a claim, such as apprenticeships or traineeships, those kind of things, where there's a claim that's going up to the ESFA, what is that claim? What do I need to do? Employability, quite often there is a claim to somewhere. This is what I've done. This is what I'm going to get paid. Management information, what reporting are you going to need out of the system? What is it going to need to tell you? Because if we know what it's going to need to tell you, then we need to make sure that you're recording that in the first place. The amount of times that we've put systems in and we're part way through the implementation, and then all of a sudden they go, oh, we've got to produce this report for the local council, and there's a whole raft of data in there that hasn't been taken into account, so we have to start again. So make sure you have all of the information that you need as an output. Take into account your stakeholders. So what does the funding provider need? Is it reporting? Is it a claim? Have you told your supplier the format of what they're going to have to produce for you at the offset? Do they know what those output needs to be? Identifying where the reports are going and who they're for, and the KPIs that you want to measure. So less around your management information, but in terms of your users and your staff, are you going to measure them on certain aspects of what they're doing? And if so, what are those considerations? A lot of programs, especially in this sector, employability and training, quite often come with a contract from the funding provider that tells you what they want out of it for you, but that's only half of the question. So that goes up to the funding provider, but you need to consider, for you to manage that business and be able to give them what they need, what are you going to measure and what are you going to look for? And that's a very important question. So once you know what the outputs are, you can then start to look at how you define the need. So what requirements do you need? Again, this is more easily done if you do it before going to look for the software. Doesn't matter the level of detail that you go to. You know, we get some people coming to us with very, very detailed requirements, and we get others coming to us with a program name and a spec from the contract provider. But when you are starting to look, if you can have the more clear you can be, the better it is for the supplier that you're going to work with. Starting with, once you've got your outputs defined, but starting with your processes, if you know what your program model looks like and what your users are going to do, create your operational program, walk a client through. So imagine your clients walking through the front door. How do they get to you in the first place? What happens when they first walk through the door or the first call? What are the interventions you need to do? What information do you need to collect about them? And then finally, what are the outcomes that come out at the other end? If you have a rough idea of that and you can give that to your supplier, that helps them shape what they can do for you. Understand your users, as we said before, but not just from a reporting perspective, but from what you want them to be able to do in the system. So are you just going to have admin staff on there, or are you going to open it up for every member of staff? If you compare employability to apprenticeships, for instance, with employability, every advisor has access to the system and they're all putting their data on. So the number of users and the user count is very much higher, and the level of information of what they're recording is higher. On an apprenticeship system, you have administrative staff who produce the claims and do all of that kind of work. And then you have tutors who come on and just record bits and bots of data. So knowing who your users are and the level of access and the types of things they're going to want to need to do. Understand your key stakeholders, and that links back to the reporting elements earlier. Who are they? And understand who they are, and that's internal as well as external stakeholders. What do your users need out of the software? And this is a key thing, actually. In all of my experience, if you make the software easy for the end user, you will get an awful lot more quality information going into it. And quite often when you define these things, you will have a user front end, and then you'll have administrative staff. You might have a report writer who's been trained to write reports based on the database. We always make it easy for the user to put the data in. That quite often can be a little bit more difficult for the report writer. But in our experience, that report writer is usually a more technical type of person and can cope with it better. And usually there's only one or two of them. Whereas with the users, there can be anything. Some of our systems have got up to 200-300 users. So I want to make it easy for that bunch of people. This bunch of people we can deal with much more easily. So make sure it makes sense to the end user. The other thing you need to be careful of is scope creep. And it's so easy to do. You hear about systems that grow arms and legs and become a little bit kind of octopusy like. It was put in for a reason. And then everybody says, oh, but we could make it do this, and we could make it do that, and we can attach this to it and make it do this. Be very clear what your software is designed to do, and then work out what you want to do from there. So in terms of your own requirements, understand all those bits that we were talking about before. If you understand what you want it to do in the first place and have that as a clear goal in mind, there's a process called MOSCO which can help you do that. So MOSCO stands for must have, should have, and could have. And what it stands for is, if you took all your requirements and you said this one is a must have, this one is a should have, this one is a could have, and that enables you to concentrate on the things that are important for day one of getting that piece of software in, the bits that we would sort of like to have, and then the bits that'll be a bonus, but really we don't need it. That either you could bring along later or isn't that important when it comes to sort of analysing the type of software that you're buying. So scope creep and MOSCO are really, really important, and especially when you bring into account the last issue, which is your timescales. We're all dealing with government departments who like to set their own timescales, and you know, over the years it doesn't really change a huge amount. I think DWP especially don't give a huge amount of leeway for some of their programs in terms of contract award to go live, and Restart has been a prime example of that. Contract awards were mid-April for a go live. Now they've gone live, but the first participant's going through the system in a couple of weeks' time. So from start to finish, that gave them, what, 3 months? Is that right? May, June, July? Yeah, 3 months. That's a very, very short piece of time to not only mobilize, if you think, you know, software is a small part of it, they're having to mobilize a whole organization, all the recruitment, all the office, if offices are being using, but all the equipment, everything else, plus the software that you want to use in a 3-month time period is very, very short. And understandably, a lot of the organizations bidding for contracts like that don't want to start putting their money down on a piece of software until they've won the contract. So that makes it a very, very short window. So that scope creep in MOSCO becomes extremely important. What do we have to have on day one? What can we not do without? When that participant walks through our door and we need to start recording that information, what do we need to record that we cannot get by without? And as you're implementing software, you can look at the journey a little bit further down the line. So where you've mapped out your processes, you can say, okay, well, it's going to be another 2 weeks before we have to do this bit. And then we reckon probably another couple of weeks before we have to do this bit. So whilst the first bits are being implemented and configured and set up, ready for the go live, as soon as they're done, the rest of your teams then start going on to the next bit and the next bit and the next bit. So have that clear path in mind. If you get caught in scope creep in a short timescale rollout, it will fail because you won't get what you need for day one. You're making it too big to cope with. So watch that as a pitfall. Just checking I've covered everything I wanted to say there. It's not just about the software. So in our view, there's an awful lot of things that underpin the successful use of a piece of software. And it starts with the partnership between you and your supplier. If you go into it thinking, I'll just buy a bit of software and I'll put it in and I'll make it work, that's fine, and it'll probably work for day one. But as we've said before, your processes will change over a period of time. And if that happens, how do we keep up with that? So partnership and trust between the supplier and the customer is actually really important. And I'd say it's one of the key decision-making elements. Can you work with the organisation that you're looking at? Do you feel that they can deliver for you what you need? Sometimes it comes down to personality. Sometimes in a marketplace, there's very little separating the different software competitors. We all do the same thing. If you take an ILR return, all pieces of software that do an ILR return all do that at the end of it. And we've all got little bells and whistles that might differentiate us, but they're fundamentally the job that you're buying it to do is done. So what makes them different? And quite often it's the relationship with the supplier. It's the one I feel I can work with best. And it sometimes comes down to personalities of, you know, the sales team or the support team that's going to be ongoing for it. The little sign that I've got on there also is really important. We like to work with our organisations. We like to work with our customers. If we understand you, and we know where you're going, we can support you in a much better way. Because if we know that not only have you got this contract, but you're now bidding for another 3 or 4 contracts, and these are the things in your pipelines, if we're having those conversations, then we can be telling you where we can help, or if we can't help, which would then enable you to go off and do other things. Or where we might be able to enhance the software or bring in features that you've not used before that might help with that particular part of your delivery. If we go in and have regular meetings with you, we set up service reviews with all of our clients on a regular basis, ranging from sort of quarterly to annually. But if we understand you and what's causing you pain or what's causing you success, the pain we can look at and say, okay, what's causing you this problem? And we can offer solutions to help you. If we know what's causing you success, well, can we build on that? Is there something else that we can do that makes it even better? That little phrase I think is really good. You know, you tell me what to do, okay, I'll just go and do it. And that's it, and it's forgotten. The teach me bit's a bit more difficult to put an analogy in the middle here, but the involve me and I learn is so much more better because we get that in-depth understanding of an organization, and we can be approaching you to say, this might work for you. Is this something that you're interested in? And we have that relationship with quite a lot of our clients where we'll develop something for somebody and I'll sit there and go, do you know what, that organization might find that really useful because they work in a similar way. So we'll take it over to them, and so it goes. So it's a really important way of thinking. You're not just buying a piece of software. The involvement through program duration is really important because programs do evolve. Going back to the 2 methods of procuring your software in the beginning of a bespoke or supporting or driving your technology, and even the bespoke, not bespoke type questions. Whatever you put in on day 1, as I said before, is not necessarily what you'll end up with at the end of it. There are 2 kind of ways of thinking about it, really. If you put an established process in place, so you've already been delivering a particular program for a couple of years, you already know what you're doing, you've got all that process in place. So now what you're doing is you're finding a piece of software to make it more efficient. You've decided, I don't know, maybe you're on a paper-based system and you need to computerize it, or the current system that you've got is no longer supporting what you need to do. How do we ensure that we make it so it supports all of that? And one of the key things is when you take an established program and you make it fit the software, you buy the software for an established program, actually that program or that process existed before the software did. So you will have made decisions about how it should work without taking into account this software that might support it. So a very, very simple example is a finance system where manually I need to spend £1,000 and I have £1,000 limit set to my name. Within my organisation, that's what I can do. And to make sure I don't go over my £1,000, it has to be signed off by a manager or somebody else. So we have a two-step process in a manual system. I have the first bit where I raise the purchase order, whatever I need to do. Then it has to be signed off by a manager to make sure that I'm buying what I'm allowed to buy at the price I'm allowed to buy it. If you put that into a piece of software, you don't need the two-step bit. So I've implemented things before where people have asked me for these two-step processes, but actually the software knows me as a user and we can program in what my limits are. So it will stop me. It goes back to supporting or driving, but it will stop me being able to go over £1,000. And at that point, there's a choice to be made. So if it is over £1,000, do I just now go and get the sign off, or does it go to somebody else to do it? But that initial part of it, the software's gone, no, you can't do that because it's £1,500. So in an established program that you're putting in, you need to be aware that there will be tweaks. Once you put it on the software, you're going to tweak it and change it, and your program might change over time. If, like Restart, you're building a program from scratch, so you've had a contract from DWP that says this is what we want to deliver, you're going to now have to map it all out on paper, and then you get your software to fit, which is great. However, when you start delivering, you realize there's things you haven't taken into account because you've designed it on paper, and that's difficult. And you've designed it without real life clients coming through, and that's difficult. So you do need to make sure that you have the ability to change your software quickly and easily. Your investment and allocation of resources is really important as well. Make sure you've got the right people in the right places, trained to the right levels. The amount of times you put software in and everybody gets a piece of training on day one. Sometimes it's a couple of weeks before they go live. Hey, presto, you're live. And everybody else sits back. And that poor user is sat in the end going, I actually can't remember what I was told. I can't remember how to do it. If you haven't invested in the training, if you haven't got follow-up training to the go live, what about the processes that are happening 4 weeks time, 6 weeks time from the initial bit of training, where now they've completely forgotten and their mind is full of all of the stuff they've been doing early doors? So make sure you've thought about all of those things when you're procuring your software and you're investing in your people. And a very important one is your information security and regulatory considerations. Quite often, and especially in sort of DWP world, software has to have Cyber Essentials plus ISO 27001, all of those kind of things. So does your supplier have everything that you need them to do? Do they comply with the GDPR regulations or the, I forget what they call PECR, the marketing regulations? Is it compliant in all of that? And is it secure? How do you know that your data is secure? What checks are you going to do to make sure that they have those levels of security in place? So the other consideration is you're buying a piece of software for a particular reason. Sometimes it's because you've been awarded a new contract. Sometimes it's because your old software, you've just grown out of it. So if you're looking at growth, make sure that your software is going to support your growth. Understand what your long-term aspirations are. Most businesses have, a 2 and a 5 year business plan, if not a 10-year business plan. Are you going to be bidding for the contracts? Is that something that you're wanting to aim for? So if you're buying it for a specific purpose, do you want to then start looking at other contracts? And especially in this sector where once you get a name for yourself as being good at delivery, you can then go on. I have a real life example of a company called Landau. They are an organisation sort of in sort of the Staffordshire area. They initially came to us for the big lottery, which is now a community fund program, and they had a turnover about £600,000 a year when they came to us about 4 years ago. And they started to deliver the big lottery, and we put the system in for them. And by using the system, they were able to evidence all of their outcomes that they were achieving. And I don't know if you can see the numbers here, but they had supported 1,013 people and they'd supported 189 people into jobs. I meant to bring you the exact figures of what they were originally targeted for. I do apologise, but their outcomes, if anybody can work it backwards, into employment, they overachieved their outcomes. They were 219% above target. In their job searches, they were 445% above target. Into training, 820% into target. And they could prove this with their figures. They have 2 building better opportunity contracts, and the second contract, which is the Shropshire, the first one is Hereford, the second one is Shropshire, a similar story. Into training, 390% over contract. Into employment, 276% over contract, and 481% into economically inactive job searches. So they were overachieving on that contract and coming out with really good figures. They started to bid for other contracts, and they started to look for other funding providers and so on. They now run about 6 contracts on their system, and they now turn over around 6 million a year. So they have grown quite considerably in that stage. And their ability to evidence what they're doing on their different programs is what's helping them win their contracts. And they're so successful at the moment that actually they don't have the capacity for additional contracts. They've just won one more, and now they're only bidding for contracts whose end dates to the contracts are beyond 2023, because they have enough business to keep them going, which is a really great place for them to be in. And when they bought our system, they bought it for BBO, but they had in mind that they wanted to start bidding for other contracts. And so we've been able to support and help them in that. And we've got another conversation to happen with them with a new contract that they've just been awarded to see, right, okay, how we're going to get the system onto this. And they're able to move their clients. And what was really important for them is, as a client walks through the door, they might put them onto the community fund program, and then actually find that that's not the best suited program for them, and they want to move them to one of the other programs that they deliver. And that's what this software allows them to do. So again, that's another example of where you need that sort of flexibility within what you're buying. So almost at the end there is, okay, well, how do we go about buying? And again, it's not rocket science here. There's a number of ways that people go out to procure. Before you go out to procure, you need to understand what your budget is, and also make sure you're looking for hidden costs. Procurement is not just about the cost of the software. It's about all of those other things that we were talking about before. So, you know, your cost of training your staff, and the cost of, you know, what technology you're going to need to deliver it on. All of those considerations that you need to think about. When you go out to procurement and you ask questions, make sure you ask them in a very clever way, because asking whether a piece of software can do something is different to whether that facility or that feature is included in the price at the end. So make sure you have a real understanding of what they're doing. So when you're procuring, a few sort of hints and tips from a supplier's perspective from when we get asked. If you're using a procurement team, that's great. And a lot of local authorities actually use procurement teams quite heavily, and some of the bigger organisations do as well. Quite often the procurement team is one step away from your operational team, and they take over when a procurement starts. And unfortunately, they don't always understand the questions that they're being asked. So where you have the opportunity to ask questions in a tender process, quite often we'll ask a question and it's quite clear from the answer they haven't understood that question. So they'll go back to the business, they'll ask the business, I'm not entirely sure in which way they do it sometimes, and then you get an answer back and we get it and thinking that's not asked that question. And that's the downside in a way of formal tender processes. If you decide to go out to tender, and there's a place for everything, a tender is that written documentation that comes out that says, these are all the things that we're looking for, tell us whether you do it. And they're in all sorts of different shapes and formats and everything. Some ask you to describe your software. Some say, can you do this? Yes. Can you do this? Yes. Can you do this? Yes. Please explain. Please explain. Either way, what's really important is that ability to ask questions. And when procurement teams get in control, you lose the ability to talk to the operational team, which is actually quite important for a supplier. So if you don't have to do that, I know there are rules and regulations around procurement, but it does make it more difficult, not just for us, but it means you're not necessarily getting the best service or the best answers from your supplier. The PQQ and the RFI, they're sort of pre-qualification questions and requests for information, they're quite good. It allows you to put feelers out. So it allows you to ask different organisations about what they're able to support you with, and you can get those back in, understand who can deliver what, and then maybe from that whittle it down to some that you then take to tender. If you go straight out to tender, sometimes you can get inundated with tender responses and you kind of get lost underneath the tenders. The PQQ RFI stage enables you to just whittle that down a little bit. The other way is to identify yourselves the suppliers. So it might be in a market such as this, there's a few suppliers that everybody knows. I'll just go and talk to them rather than opening out to the big wide world where I might get, dynamics and bespoke suppliers and all those kind of things. So you could go down the sort of demonstration phase where you talk to your supplier, they come in or online and they show you the software and allow you to answer questions or ask questions. From a supplier's perspective, we don't mind which way you go out and buy. The best way, though, is a mixture of a tender and a demo. So you've done your due diligence by asking a series of questions that are important to you, and you've got those documented. But you've also seen the software, the amount of organisations that buy purely from a tender. So it's written word, and that doesn't always work. One example I've got of a tender, we had a tender in about a few years ago, and it was one of the tenders where it just said, can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? And for each module, for recording a vacancy in a course, they asked lots of questions. Can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? Every single question, if you read it on its own, yes, we can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. I know what they want to do because I've worked in this industry. I've supplied a lot of systems, and when I read them all together, A, what they're asking for each individual question makes no sense. And B, if you put it all together, you couldn't deliver it because one negates another. So you have to really think about the way that you're asking questions. If you can ask a supplier to explain it in their own words, that's much better. And the format of a tender, think about if you're asking them to give you explanatory answers, please don't put it in Excel, because trying to put an explanatory answer into an Excel cell is an absolute nightmare. Word document is the best format. So think about the format of the tender to get the best responses for you. The engagement with, in the demo phase, sorry, if you are having the demonstration, have the right people there as well. Quite often, it goes down to IT to make a decision and they don't get users in, or they get users in and there's no representative from IT who can ask some of the questions that the users wouldn't think of or the operational staff wouldn't think of. So think about your audience in a demo as well. Who needs to be there, who needs to see it. I think that was everything that I wanted to say on that one. Let me just double check there. Sorry for going back to my notes. That's the only thing I was going to say. As a supplier, if we've engaged with you before the demo or the tender stage, it's easier for us because when you're asking us a question, we understand the context in which you're asking it, so we give you a better answer. I've seen tenders that we've done, and if we hadn't have engaged, we wouldn't have really understood where you're getting it from. So if you have a choice of how you procure, I know in certain local authority areas and certain organisations it's taken away, but if you have a choice, make it a mixture of questions and demos and talking to the supplier, because it's that way you'll understand whether that supplier you feel could give you what you need long term. So that's kind of my hints and tips for procurement of software. If you've got any questions either relating to the content, my contact details are, relating to the content, my contact details are up on the screen right now. if you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer them, obviously. And if you want to get in touch with me or anybody here at Cognisoft, then please feel free. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Emma. That was really, really interesting, really clear. Steps that you have to take. So I was it really interesting. So thank you for that. I've had a few thank yous for the session in the chat. No questions as yet, but to be honest, I think you covered everything that we would need to know. We'll see if anything else comes in, but I thought that was really, really, really well done. So
thank you.
Thank you for the session, Emma. I look forward to revisiting the video online to how we can make this work for us. And Neil says, thanks, Emma. How do you think the demands on employability systems are likely to change over the next few years?
I think that's going to be more around the delivery options. I mean, I've implemented employability systems for over 20 years, and actually there's really only one. There's not that many ways of skinning a cat. You've got to work with a participant, with a job seeker, to get them into work. And there's usually, you get them through the door, you do the interventions, you do the job searching, you do all of those activities that you normally do. I think the demands on the systems now is for greater flexibility, as we've seen with what's happened over the last year and a half, of changing from that face-to-face interaction to an online, more online. I personally feel the face-to-face interaction has to stay to a degree, and especially with some of the client groups, because I don't think everybody interacts as well online. I know, I hate it. I'd much prefer to be in a room here talking to you all face-to-face. But the ability for systems to deliver the content online, for advisors to be able to get more information online. What we're seeing, certainly with National Career Service, because we provide the National Career Service system, and for them to get the action plan out to a client. The client used to be sat here, they would produce the action plan, get the signature, everything is done. What we had to do with the technology is change that, so at the end of the action plan, we fire it off automatically in an email out to the client. And the ESFA actually have allowed the wet signature element of it to disappear, and they will allow confirmation back from the client as evidence that they've received it. So there's subtle changes that go on, and it will be more around the technology and the process and what's allowed. DWP for employability is still very strict. ESFA actually is much more lenient than DWP are, and it takes a little while to get DWP going, and hopefully they'll follow suit, but they're a bit more risk averse, I find, from a government department. So as they let us do more with technology, then I think that's the way it will change.
Thanks, Emma. Very helpful.
Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. I haven't got any more questions in, just a few more thank yous from people who have enjoyed the session. A very nice prompt for me to make sure I get it uploaded this afternoon. I will make sure I get that uploaded so people can refer back to the slides. So thank you very much for today's session, Emma. It was really, really useful.
Great. I'll send the slides over for you, Helen. And I've left all my notes on there. So if you don't want to listen to me waffle, a lot of my notes are in the slides.
Okay. You weren't waffling at all. I thought it was really, really well done. If you didn't have a script, you're incredibly good at this naturally. So I'm jealous.
Thank you.
So, okay, thank you everyone who's still on. I know some people have left messages that they had to pop off. And for those of you who are still with us, just to let you know that next week we're joined by the Good Employability Company, who are going to be looking at, their topic is garbage in, garbage out. And they'll be looking at some interventions that have taken place, why people use them and do they work. So for those of you who have attended any of those sessions, you'll know David's fantastic, and he brings a lot of research and evidence into his sessions. And then the following week we have R&IB joining us for another of our Seeing Opportunities, and we're going to be looking at going back into the workplace after a break via the coronavirus pandemic. So how can we support people with sight impairment to return to the workplace? So that's everything I have for now. Thank you very much everyone who's attended today, and thank you very, very much, Emma, for a great session.
Pleasure.
Everyone, take care. Bye-bye.